Great. Okay, good. Okay, quick review. These two folks have already been introduced. You know Rick. And the only thing I'll say about Rick is we should have seen his departure coming because he's worked in Hawaii twice. He came to the National Hurricane Center twice, so it's only logical he's going to go back to Atlanta again. All right, I don't know where you go after that. You just have to start a new routine or something. All right. And Leslie Chapman Henderson, of course, with the brilliant flash thing. So let's... Okay, you know me. All right, we got Rick. This gentleman has been beat up pretty good the last couple of days as an audience member. Tom Lee, he's the vice president of Newsgathering at the Weather Channel in Atlanta. He oversees all the aspects of the Weather Channel's field coverage, a position he's held for more than 8 years. And part of that job includes collaborating with the Weather Channel meteorologists to identify locations where the meteorologists and the reporters and the crews are going to stand out in the wind. And lining all the other resources ahead of the storms. Prior to joining the Weather Channel, Tom was with NBC for more than 20 years, half of that a senior editor on the NBC News Desk. He's also worked as a news producer for NBC's Today Show. So welcome, Tom. And I'm really excited to have our next panelist, which is Dr. Gina Eosco. She's a senior social scientist and risk communication expert at Eastern Research Group. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Policy from the University of Maryland, and both a Master's in Science and Ph.D. in Communications from Cornell University. So please welcome Gina. So we're going to just jump a little ahead here, and I had some stuff in here, but in the essence of time, we'll just keep this. And I'm just going to throw this out because I mentioned Tom has been beat up on a couple of the workshops because of some of the stuff that the Weather Channel has done in the past and what they're doing now. So Tom and I were just conversing in the exhibit hall earlier today, and he mentioned something which I didn't realize, but I thought about it and he was right. The Weather Channel of 20, 25 years ago and the way it communicated everything is very different than what it was today. So I want Tom to kick it off and give us a little history on where you've come and where you think the challenges are right now.
Sure. And again, I know one of the things that people will always come to us and say, well, why do you have reporters standing out telling us how bad it is when you tell people not to do that? Well, by the very nature, the very definition of reporting, basically, you are better able to provide the viewers an understanding of what the impacts actually are while you are there. I will add that in recent years, we have started to place more cameras that are fixed in positions to show the impacts of storm surge and also flooding. A lot of times stations will rely, and media and emergency managers will rely on cameras that are mounted very high. The typical traffic camera you might see, but unfortunately those don't provide the kind of type of resolution. They do not really show, again, a good perspective. So we've gone and we've added to that in recent years as well. But for us, it's not only working with the National Hurricane Center, but all the other state emergency management agencies, county and local, trying to get their messages across. Don't assume that we're some monolith that isn't interested in what you're trying to tell your citizens. We definitely are, and we want to do a better job of fielding your requests and making sure that you know that we're actually interested in hearing what you have to say. It's a two-way street. We'll reach out to you, but please, when you see an opportunity or a need to communicate something effectively, please try to give us a chance. That's it.
Okay. And this will be like all the other sessions we've had this afternoon. Please feel free to come up to the microphones. This is really your last chance to get at these guys. So please take advantage of that, definitely. Gina, social science.
Yeah.
I mean, who heard of Facebook 10 years ago? Who heard of Twitter 5 years ago?
Right.
Who heard of Snapchat 2 years ago? Oh my gosh, where are we going now?
Right. We're a society on information overload. Exactly. We're expecting hurricane updates every 10 minutes, even though you may not have that available, but we're expecting it because information is instantaneous now. So our expectations are mismatched with what we actually have available to us from our science. And begrudgingly, actually, Tom, I have research to support what you just said. And I say this begrudgingly because I too, when I see reporters out there in the midst of a beach, I'm going, why on earth did you send it there? But unfortunately, I've done research that looks at graphics and how the public responds to different types of graphics. And although this community loves rainbows, it doesn't literally rain rainbow-colored Skittles. Wouldn't it be fun if it did? But it doesn't. And the fact of the matter is, when we use all this imagery that is a depiction of something but not the actual something, unfortunately, it helps to get that photo, to get that video footage. But of course, I would encourage you to do that as safely as possible, and those cameras are a really fantastic idea instead of putting your reporters out there. But research does show that photos and videos are a really great way to make the risk become more concrete. All right, uncertainty, we can't see it. What color is it? What does it look like? Risk, we know there's a satellite image of a hurricane out there. You're telling me surge is forthcoming, but it's not here yet. You tell me it's going to be windy, but my tree is still in my backyard. It's not way. You can't see it. And so I think the challenge for us, especially in this social media world, is sharing images that can really make the risk and the uncertainty come alive and make it more concrete.
And I remember this even when I was learning television back in the 70s. Yes, the 70s. You could have the perfect forecast every day. Yes, Bob, we know you did every day. But it didn't matter a hill of beans if you weren't able to communicate it, if you couldn't get that information out. So it really starts at the bottom. And Rick, we're in a situation where, they're disseminating it, but let's face it, the material, the base is coming from us. So the Hurricane Center. So how do you move that forward?
Part of the answer is what we've been doing. It's not the whole answer. The product changes that we're making are part of the strategy to depict the hazard, but as Gina says, that's not enough. A variety of things we've been doing in addition to just the products. Dennis, you know as well as anybody, we've been doing our media pool sooner and sooner so that there's a human talking to the public when it's just products a little earlier in the game. Before Joaquin really ever became a threat, which it fortunately never did directly to the east coast of the U.S., we were doing a soft media pool. In Matthew, in Hermine, we were out there a lot sooner getting on television as compared to prior years. But one thing Ed and Dennis have championed is, like, when we do our media pool hits, we're going to start showing some video behind us. We can show a storm surge graphic, but then, as time permits, show a video of what storm surge actually looks like behind us. Because the biggest challenge I think we still face, despite however good of products we create and however effectively we communicate verbally or with images, people just aren't afraid enough of water. And I think we're making a lot of strides on storm surge, but I think our next big challenge is on the inland flood piece. And so we've got a lot of opportunities now to change how we communicate the inland flood hazard, and not just in real time, in advance in the outreach and education. Just because I promised I would. Some of the ideas that we have been already talking about with regard to how to communicate the inland flood hazard more effectively in real time. Let's start bringing it all together, all the Weather Service, WFO, flood watches and warnings in an updated fashion via a thumbnail on the Hurricane Center website, give it more prominence there. The Weather Prediction Center, the WPC, has an excessive rainfall outlook that maybe with a little bit of enhancement in how it's presented and a little more visibility from the Hurricane Center could highlight when they draw a high chance of excessive rainfall, they're talking potentially deadly flood. But that's not going to be enough either. We have to do a lot of education far in advance via initiatives like the Hurricane Strong campaign, where we're talking about flood insurance way before the event ever happens. We're talking about turn around, don't drown, and how to keep yourself and your family safe from floods well before somebody drives around a barricade like we heard about today. So there's going to be we need to really get serious about the communication on the inland flood hazard like we have been on the storm surge hazard. There's more, but those are some of the highlights that come to my mind.
And with Leslie, of course, it turns out, okay, now you've got a national campaign that started out literally with grassroots, and you've got to take that up to a level to communicate the risk.
Well,
Well, we do, and we have a formula. We're very fortunate when we started out working with Walt Disney World and created an experience in park. We did a lot of behavioral research before, during, and after, and we drove millions of people through there, and we learned that our messaging is either going to be to disrupt a bad behavior or to encourage and validate a good behavior, but no matter what it is, if it's working, it's usually an empowering message. And that we get to with the formula where we identify a problem, like we have with overall hurricane awareness and engagement and confusion and inundation and too much message and too many apps and channels and alerts and news and who do I listen to and all this confusion. And we said, okay, let's just pop out of all of that and look at if we can become empowering about hurricanes for people to become hurricane strong. And so we identify something like this, and this was pretty aggressive because we're capturing the whole piece, but years ago here in 2012 we launched a campaign to get at a specific thing that annoyed us, which was masking tape on windows. And we did research and we proved what we believed, which is people thought it was okay to put masking tape on windows. And we work with our crazy creative team, futurists, Emmy Award-winning video producers and others, and we came up with the call to arms, go tapeless. And we kicked that off here, and we got national press. We were on NBC Nightly News, and Tom Brokaw said, you're not going to believe this, but at the hurricane conference, they've told us no more tape. So we did the campaign, we did post-testing, we changed behavior and perceptions, and then that call to arms got viral, went into blogs and people, and then up in New York, of course, it was go tapeless. Stupid. That was the way I did it. But I heard a story from Mike Baresh, if he's still in here, that during Matthew, there came the tape again, right? But everything we do is designed to be used by you. We're a small little group. We create tools and campaigns and things that people can take it and run with it. So Mike pulled out his Go Tapeless shirt that he got in 2012 here at the conference. He went on a rampage on air. He taped the camera lens. And he tried to drive that message through, go tapeless, and it got lift. And I hope, hopefully they sold less masking tape. But the formula is we have to figure out what that problem is, we disrupt it or we validate it, but through empowerment. I personally think that one of the mistakes we make here is sometimes we're a little doom and gloom. I can handle reality because I'm going to be here with you guys hearing and learning and progressing. But we have to be careful with the public. We give them too much doom and gloom, they're out. And they're going to just take their chances. And I think that we've learned that, and so everything we look at, whether it's turn around, don't drown, clearly a disruption message, what we did with Stormstruck at Disney, the Go Tapeless, or even things like, our tornado message for shelters is given an ordinary room an extraordinary purpose. So I just want to encourage us to, remember that human nature, we've got a lot on our plates. So this hurricane thing, we're either going to park it aside or we're going to get in because it's not going to, make us crazy. And this morning, one last thought, Omar Bourne from New York City said, as a PIO, his challenge and his pledge is to message during the blue sky times. And that's where we are right now. I couldn't agree more. And that's what we'll do this year with the hat, with Hurricane Strong. We'll make the silly pose all over the place. We will let go of caring why we win, and if it's because of a silly pose, that we win and someone gets a kit or strengthens their home, or maybe even a Florida legislator wakes up and says, oh gosh, let's not change the building code because it's bad news. So for my part, I just want to be here as a champion for positive messaging. Yes, research-based, but we got to be careful because we're going to lose them. And we, to some degree, we have a lot of people to regain and to win over in the first place.
Yeah. And Gina and I have talked about this before over some Mexican food. One thing I want to highlight is the importance of social sciences being involved in all of this. It's been heavily involved in our product development. Most of what we're showing you this week from the Hurricane Center perspective has gone through some social sciences evaluation. Even that new wind timing product has direct involvement from social scientists. But one thing I've shared with Gina is, I think we need more social sciences input in how we do our outreach and education during the good weather. Because I think we in the Weather Service have been pretty good at doing school talks, and for years and years we were good at doing the Hurricane Awareness Tour, but to really move the needle and to get people to do the things that are the themes of Hurricane Strong and the National Hurricane Preparedness Week, I need some help on how to get those messages across, because I'm not a psychologist, and there are just as many flavors of social science as there are meteorology, so there's a lot of expertise. But that's some of the input I think we need.
All right. And just to jump ahead of panel here, you look back at the 2016 season, first above average season since 2012, 15 named storms, 7 hurricanes, 4 majors, and the hurricane drought in Florida was over after 11 years. They got Hermine. Now, we've already got several seasonal outlooks which are out there. Dr. Phil Klotzbach gave his analysis just yesterday in several sessions, and I've already seen the headlines. Quiet hurricane season. We're going to be, you don't see the stuff, you see quiet hurricane season. And I wonder, first off, from a social science perspective, how do you get across that it doesn't matter? How do you get that across? Because that was always a pet peeve with me.
Well, I think one thing we actually have to ask is how much does the public tune in to those forecasts?
Well, judging by the emails and the phone calls and everything, a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the problem with that is those are the folks that might be the highly motivated individuals. They're the loudest individuals, but they're not necessarily representative of a larger population. And that's something I think that we as a community we struggle with because typically those who have complaints communicate them, but those complaints aren't necessarily representative of the population at large. And that can get really challenging. And that's why when we do social science research, we're looking for that generalizable or more representative complaint, if you will, and reaction. I think that, I think all of us have done a pretty darn good job of saying it only takes one. Hurricane Andrew obviously is that traditional season that we go back to and show that it only does take one. But even if you do have an active year, not everyone will see it. So for some people, it will remain a quiet year. You may not see any. And even if it's a very busy year for some, still quiet for others. So, it's all relative. It's about personalizing the risk for individuals and making sure they understand that where they live, they are vulnerable to that risk. And I think, as Leslie said, making it more of a fun dialogue. If you decide to live near the coast or anywhere, even within, certain mileage inland, you're at risk, and we have to get accustomed to that. That becomes challenging because it becomes normalized in our everyday life. So that's what we're kind of up against, is trying to remind people that that risk will come about, and it'll be a disruption to our daily life.
And Tom, as a national outlet, how do you bring that down to the local level, if you can do it?
Sure, and I think a lot of times whenever there's an advisory that comes out, or an outlook, I should say, again, I think our on-air meteorologists do a good job of couching what that truly means. I think making it to the local level, I think in each case it's something different. We've looked at storms in Texas. You go back to Tropical Storm Bill a couple years ago, which was something that really was spawned with a very short fuse, as they would say. But keep in mind, most Houstonians in 2015 had already gone through 2 non-tropical significant floods through that year. So you just try to put in context what the event is. People are naturally going to relate it to something that they've had an experience with. But again, we have to do a better job of not just explaining what the forecast is, but then again showing what the impacts may be. And it may be different in different areas. So again, just because you had a problem the one time doesn't mean that you're going to experience the same problem again this time. And it's up to us then to try to make sure that everyone understands that when there is a change in a forecast, that we signal that change with the confidence that we have, because too many people will have heard what they heard 3 days ago and will think that that's still a valid forecast. But we have to do a job. Our job is to make sure that they understand that forecast now means different impacts. So.
comment?
Well, I would argue too, when I saw Ed Rappaport's, the BAMS 2016 on the indirect fatalities, I thought to myself, why couldn't we turn this list into a bunch of media tips for not only broadcast meteorologists, but also newscasters to talk about? You know, we do have such long lead times when an event unfolds, right? It's out in the Atlantic for days. How many days were we talking about Matthew? For example, I mean, it felt like 3 weeks. I'm not sure it was, but it was an incredibly long time. So there are a lot of things that we could communicate about the weather, but we could also communicate those indirect ideas. Hey, there's a hurricane out there. I'm not sure if it's going to hit you, but you know, unfortunately, my dad likes Costco better than Home Depot. Hey, Dad, you want an excuse to go to Costco? Check your battery stash. I mean, that's something that we could talk about in advance, that kind of blue sky weather, as Leslie talking about. You can build that hurricane strong and build that into the weather forecast. I think we can really find some unique ways to do that and build the hurricane strong message.
Leslie?
We just published in our monthly E-News magazine Ed's report on indirect death causation for the very reason that I think, you know, what we're starting to look at is this whole idea of getting past the worrying about being hit by the hurricane and helping people understand the benefit of the peace of mind when the onslaught starts and people are thundering towards Home Depot and they're all freaked out and they're buying water. Just keep that case of water and replenish it in your home. Make it an ordinary thing so when all that starts, you can stay out of the fray. But when I saw the pie and I saw the cardiac related indirect death causations, I remembered a gentleman we met in '04 in Charlie, and he lived a couple doors down from a home we were featuring, and he passed away 2-3 days after the storm. He was elderly. And you need to start, we need to bring, not to scare, because in our experience, the storm does a good enough job scaring people. Our job is to find a way to help people see through and move through it. But I think that people have no idea. I mean, we talk about chainsaws and other things, but the cardiac induced and the stress. And I think we can take that stress and invert that reality into something that could be very positive about, you know, make it socially normal to be the one that's already ready. So you're not screaming out on the streets and getting in the way, and people are, you know, topping off their gas tanks and all that frenzy. The other piece to that is power outage. People hate being without power. And so when you talk about preparedness and you can start tying it to things like the new gadgetry, the hand-cranked radios, the solar power flashlights, and you're giving them tips about kind of things like that and tools, all of a sudden it is starting to become a little fun. I have a basket full of stuff. Some of it I get at these conferences, thank you, every year. But, you know, take that indirect, that stress, and bring some of that forward so people start understanding, even if I'm not right there in that line or that cone or the, you know, wobble and all those things, forget all that. My power might go out anyway, and I could be 100 miles away. So I think we have some things to work with there, as long as we take them and make them something that people can do something about it. We cannot bring people up against a brick wall of, oh my goodness, and there's no solution. There has to be an answer, an action, something they can do to help themselves or others, and then we can keep them and move them through.
Just like the inland flood challenge is so daunting because it happens so frequently that people get into trouble and even drive around the barricades. Similarly, one of the common causes of fatalities that are associated with the power outages is the carbon monoxide issue. And this gets back to the psychology, the social science input, is I don't know what to say differently to change the outcome on people driving into water-covered roadways, to run their generator indoors, and to continually do the things that seem to happen so frequently. I try to say it so many different ways, but sometimes I think I'm not making a difference because I don't feel informed about what the effective approach is. Now, I'm convinced that the Hurricane Strong Initiative and making it fun and engaging people in new ways and all of us getting on the same page is part of the solution, as is our media partners taking Ed's report and helping people understand all the ways they can get into trouble before, during, and after the storm. But I still don't feel completely armed with the best strategies to communicate these frequently recurring causes of death.
Well, you mentioned the inland flooding. Now, obviously, that was a huge problem with Matthew. And I would wonder, just from the folks that are here, how would you see, or how do you think that threat could be better communicated? Anybody? Bueller? Anybody? How do you think? Because you're there. You're the ones facing the camera. You're the emergency managers that are trying to tell your folks. How do you do that, Dan?
I'll add to that, Dennis. We get so much focus on the coast during hurricane threats that sometimes we do forget about the inland flooding. And I would ask Tom, I mean, do you all consider putting reporters, inland locations? It's certainly not the trees blowing and the surge coming up, but there is the threat. And I don't know if there's a way that we could do that. I assume it's done more at the local level, but perhaps that's a national level could be done there too.
The last storm was a bit of a challenge, or Matthew, I should say, because of the track that it took, that we had to have a number of reporters up and down the coast, we felt. But we did have folks who moved. Mike Seidel somehow got out of Cuba and got into North Carolina. I'm not sure how. I know a byproduct of it was a bottle of Cuban rum, but I don't know any more than that. But no, seriously, one of the challenges that we do face when we are looking at different points up along the coast, we know that we are at one point during each hour going to say, and in our next segment, we'll talk about what the threats will be, in the next 48 hours or later as this storm moves inland. But as we've seen again with a number of storms, I mean, even go back to the Pacific storm and Patricia and how much of an impact that had, and again, not directly, but still a meteorological event that was tied to a hurricane. Again, I think a lot of people in Texas were caught off guard for that, even though forecasts were out there that said there is going to be this stream of moisture coming in. But what we try to do in each case, we will do at the top and bottom of each hour a sort of a what we know, and then that would include some of the information that's the most current, most imminent, but then again later in each hour or in each half hour, basically by design, try to come in and show the impact further down. It's not going to bump off, again, the immediate impacts, but we do try to give it that context as well, though. So.
And I addressed this to Max with when Hurricane Matthew was on our doorstep. Broward County, of course, had the hurricane warning. Miami-Dade did not. And this was a communication thing. We knew that the core winds were going to stay off the coast, and most of my neighborhood wasn't going to board up on that. Actually, they were using me as a barometer. Is he boarding up? No, then we're not going to board up. Come on, every weather guy knows they're using you as a barometer in your neighborhood. But my neighbor heard one of the competitors of you say, this thing has 115 mile per hour winds and there's a hurricane warning in Broward County. You're going to have 115 mile per hour winds. And my next door neighbor hit the panic button. He boarded up. It took him 6 hours to board up, and he and his family were ready to go to Fort Myers. And I'm thinking, these are people, and it's probably very common, that they hang on every single word. How do you get around that?
I don't have the answer to that other than to say that you have to manage expectations somehow. And I think the Hurricane Center has taught us well. I think for the wind that you're talking about, the probabilistic wind graphics worked very well. In the most likely scenario for the strongest winds remain offshore. There's still the chance of not zero that it could not hit the coast, but it was much, much less. I thought that worked well, but and in the very beginning, when it even looked like it was coming close to Florida, I kept saying that, it's hard enough to forecast the track. The track's getting better all the time. It's still difficult to forecast the intensity, but it's really tough to forecast the size. And so I kept trying to emphasize, we don't really know, and we can't promise you exactly what the wind's going to be on that west side. I don't know if it did any good or not, but you need to manage expectations, and you can't wait till it's off the coast to do that.
Right. And Gina, I would pose that to you. How much psychology is involved here where they're hanging on every word, or maybe they're just trying to verify their own fears or thoughts?
Yeah, I just wrote down about 10 different things. So first of all, when it comes to mass communication, I don't know that we have great social science research in the realm of broadcast meteorology. So there are a lot of issues in mass communication, anchoring effects, recency and primacy effects, meaning sometimes you only hear the first thing in the forecast and you don't hear anything else. Or conversely, you might be an individual that you only hear the last thing, but you didn't hear anything else before it. And there may also be something in that forecast, we don't know what that something is, that is an anchoring point for you because it's really personal to you. So you anchor to something in the forecast, but we don't know what it is. So that's a big problem. We really don't have data on this. You know, it's not like I can't set up a weather balloon, goes up and collects weather data. I can't just set up my, people balloons and go, all right, collect data. Social media is great, but social media data is really, really messy. So it'd be great to be able to study this in a systematic way. So that's number one. Number two, when you look at the Center for Disease Control, they actually have a group that does media monitoring. And when they hear false messages out there, I'm sure that, well, I don't know what they're doing right now. There's a lot of interesting news out there. But one of their goals is that if there are counter messages out there that is counter to what CDC is trying to issue, they will issue a press release to all of their news partners saying, no, that's not true. This is the protective action that would be good. Gosh, wouldn't it be fun if we could have media monitoring and I could say, hey, station so-and-so, that's not true. There is no hurricane warning. There are no winds for that area, but we do not have a source for that type of issue. Probabilities, this is what gets really difficult. This community here, right, we're unique. We understand these products. You're getting training this week on it. But when it comes to the average individual, probabilities are hard. You're also asking people to understand probabilities during an event. They may have kids, they may have a sick parent, they may be sick themselves. They have other things to think about than figuring out, oh, is that 30% chance of tropical storm force winds? Is that worth taking? I'm telling you right now that they don't even have a mind or space for that in their brain. They're looking to all of us to help them with those judgments. There's psychology and risk communication. We call it heuristic versus systematic thinking. In order to think highly cognitively, which is really what you are all doing in your daily jobs, you need the systematic part of your brain. You need all of your cognitive focused abilities. The heuristic side of it is all your emotions, your gut feeling, affect, right? When it comes to hurricanes, a lot of people are using their emotions to make those decisions. They're looking for trusted sources. They're looking largely at the National Hurricane Center and all the media outlets that are helping. And the Weather Channel comes up. There's a Weather Channel effect in almost every one of my studies. If Jim Cantori is in your neighborhood, they are evacuating very quickly. So that's, maybe we ought to just make more vans and have hurricane strong vans that look like the Weather Channel and put them into the evacuation zone, even if they're not the Weather Channel. Maybe that would be largely effective. I'm just trying to think outside the box here. But this stuff is hard. It's really, really hard. We're asking people to have a lot of attention, a lot of detail on weather, but fact of the matter is, weather is one important thing out of many other important things. So we're competing for attention.
I would add one quick thing just to say that last year, again with Matthew, to go back to that for a second, when there were mandatory evacuation orders that were issued and yet people were not taking heed of those, Brian went on and did a Facebook post that basically got more attention. It was a different audience in effect, it was a different message, and it was in a different tone. So that type of message is something that stood out, and so that again, it's kind of hard to understand why people would not evacuate, but if you talk to them in a more direct one-on-one way as opposed to what you always see on the news, you might get a different impact.
And Rick, if you'd follow up on what we did with communicating that message because they weren't evacuating.
Right. We're always looking for new ways to enhance how we communicate, not just new products, but to say things in a different way. And that's one reason why we did the soft media pool in Joaquin and pre-Hermine in the media room, not on the operations floor, to give the sense that, okay, this isn't the imminent hurricane threat, but it's still something you need to pay attention to. And since during Matthew, we were already in the operations area, already in the media pool, and through our Decision Support Services coordinator, Jen McNatt, who came from Weather Service Southern Region to help us keep our eyes and ears open to what was going on in the other WFO's areas of responsibility, she was getting feedback that in many of the areas under evacuation orders, people weren't heeding it. And through the hurricane liaison team, the FEMA presence at the Hurricane Center, we're getting that similar thing. So I thought, well, I can't just do a top of the hour briefing and say something about that. We had to do something that looked different, that was attention getting. And so that's why I talked to Dennis and we decided to do something with a different camera angle and with a different approach. I have no idea if that changed anybody's minds or changed anybody's actions, but that's the mindset, is to do things differently when you're trying to get someone's attention. Just like in the middle of a sentence, if I want to get your attention, you change your pitch and your pace, and you just got to do something to rattle people out of their comfort zone. And but I still could use a lot of input on how best to do that. I don't think we always know if we're changing the outcome, but it's hard to get people's attention in the information overflow. Yeah.
So we try to do steady diet during blue sky, which we call peacetime, of information and keep it going, keep it consistent. And on the tornado safe room side, we had been doing that for years. Safe rooms save lives. They can be above ground, below ground, outside, wherever they need to be, in steady diet, but then you also need to be prepared. If we have our message act together to identify opportunities to really drive change. That happened for us in the Tuscaloosa outbreak. Some FEMA partners were on the ground in Athens, Alabama, and saw a weekly newspaper, and on the front page there was a very iconic photo of a family, young family, emerging from a tornado safe room holding their 5-month-old and 3-month-old. Their house was gone. The 3 and 4 houses to either side were both gone. And FEMA folks called, shouted out, sent it to us, and we got it. And basically, I sent it to CNN, who I didn't work with you guys as much at the time, and because we had just met with them and talked about awareness, and they said, give me something visual, and I'll help you raise awareness. So I sent it to Mary Lynn Ryan, and she said, this is it. This is perfect. Get them for me. I need them on TV tonight. And I went, oh, my God. I don't know where these people are, who they are, where they live, but through the magic of partnerships and communication, and somebody went to University of Alabama and their roommate, etc., we got the Harrisons on the phone the night before the royal wedding. And Sarah Beth did an interview, and it was a sea change. It was a change moment for the whole idea of tornado safe rooms and awareness in this country. And people in certain parts of the country that are in Tornado Alley won't buy a home without a safe room anymore. And the data I have from that is just through sales of safe rooms and shelters. And I guess my point here is steady diet messaging. Let's all keep our act together and make sure we're not conflicting, but then let's also be on the lookout. So when we see that opportunity to get that visceral heart to people where they understand, I need a safe room. And people tell me now, I would never live anywhere without one, period. Because tornadoes are so prolific and possible. We also have to take advantage very sensitively of those things. Now the Harrison family, they come out for us, they speak out, they stand out, they tell their story, and it makes a difference. So I think we need to combine all those opportunities too when it makes sense, and of course sensitively, but in the Harrisons' case, they've helped, I think, thousands of people and will in the future just because of the decision to get themselves safer and from tornadoes. And that can work with hurricanes as well.
All right, in the little time we have left, I'm going to go to each one of the panelists here and just for some general closing remarks, and we'll start with Gina.
Sure, thank you so much. So a couple final points I'd like to say is one, that trusted source is really important. I heard Brian Norcross's message last year, and I thought it was incredibly touching. I mean, I know Brian, so when I saw it, he did change his tone, and tone really matters, and that comes up in a lot of the focus groups that I do. So finding sort of those local Weather Ready Nation ambassadors, and maybe they are the emergency manager in the community, but it might even be someone more local than that. It might be, someone who's the director of your board at your condo association that doing an appeal for your community. Find those local ambassadors and help them get out the message. I also want to say, I do think, and I've been monitoring this the last 10 years, and I've been helping colleagues with this, we really need to connect our forecast to the evacuation areas. What I mean by that is, I've had friends who are not sure whether or not they're in an evacuation area or not, and Googling such information is incredibly difficult. It's not always on the local emergency management website. Sometimes it's only at the news stations have it, may have a list. And so my friends on the coast were having a real hard time wondering whether they were in or whether they were out of the evacuation zone. The other thing I would say to that is we need to emphasize those who do need to evacuate and those who do not, and why. Because those who may not be in evacuation may still have a fear of the event, but we don't want them clogging our roads. And of course, I know that's something that's important to all of you. So I think as messengers, I think we have to remember to communicate those who are in that risk zone and those who perhaps aren't. And I have a crazy idea that I've been pitching, and I'm just going to go ahead and pitch it again. I have this magic school bus idea. You know, these newscasters are going and they're showing the surge areas. Well, I would like a focus group bus. And I would like to go in areas, Rick, we say we need information from people, right? And we always collect it after the fact. We really don't know what they're doing before the storm. We're hoping that we're preparing, but we don't know how they're responding to our media information. I would love to get that focus group bus and go in, talk to folks, park in the grocery parking lot, bring them on in, talk to them, have them watch your forecast, and no offense, beat it up. Give you constructive criticism. How are you going to get any better, right? How are we going to get any better if we don't go in our communities and ask for that constructive feedback? I think we often think of social science as stuff that can happen either after the fact or way before. Let's just integrate it during.
Yeah, sounds like a story idea. Tom?
Indeed, indeed. It kind of brings to mind my high school calculus teacher who said to me, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. And somehow I passed. But nevertheless, I think the important thing we have to do is just to differentiate the variety of hazards. I know another point that someone made earlier today was too much emphasis, again, back on the skinny black line. But on the Weather Channel, if we show a cone, or if there's a line, if there is, or points, if you will, that we're going to show a cone, and we're going to discuss what that impacts are. And when that cone may shift, or the track, quote unquote, may shift, again, it doesn't mean that necessarily you're free of all hazards. It just may mean that you may have a different set of hazards that you're now having to explain to people. But I think the advantage now, the Hurricane Center has made great advances in the last few years. They continue to. It's always been a reliable resource. And again, getting people to understand that message, and again, to differentiate the hazards that are there. Again, the tropical storm force winds and the arrival time, I think that'll be important for people. It will help them understand and be able to plan as well. And then the advantage of being able to identify something that may develop and what its impact may be with the advisories, that will certainly get people's attention as well. So again, every year we're given all this information, we can explain it to them, and it's also our job to help them understand it. So that's our goal.
Okay. Leslie, quick.
Just want to say that we look forward to working with all of you. And Gina, we do have the storm surge evacuation zone listing. We do a study every year. We just updated it, and we did, and it's, when we first started it, it was at Rick's request. There were spots and a lot of missings, but every year, more and more of you guys are getting those zones and maps online, and we really appreciate it. But we do have it. It is updated, and we'll make sure we somehow get it all out there.
Great. Rick?
I know that it's, especially on the bad days, it's tempting for us to get exasperated and cynical and think, well, we just can't help everybody. People just aren't going to listen. But if we help just one person, this entire effort is worth it. So let's just keep trying. Number two is, and something I've been talking about with Brian Norcross and others, that we do need to take a little bit more advantage of technology and maybe not just do the media pool approach. And Dennis, you and I have talked about this, about taking advantage of streaming technologies to go on and get our word out and not wait for all the stations to necessarily cover us, but go directly to the people through streaming it. The stations too, but get out on social media, get out directly to folks who might watch it on their phone and their computer. Then finally, instead of a broad-based comment, I wanted to just throw out something maybe some of you could talk about over dinner. And I've talked about this with some of my emergency management colleagues, and when Dan Brown mentioned why don't you send some people to cover the inland places, it reminded me of an idea I've been tossing around with some folks, and that is, would it be feasible to have inland evacuation zones based on whatever data we can collect on where the greatest risks of inland flooding are, starting near the most vulnerable river locations. And maybe there could be prescribed evacuation zones for inland locations, and that could potentially have a number of benefits. One would be you could use it to educate the public about their risk of potentially having to leave an area because it's life-threatening, like we saw that happened in North Carolina during Matthew. Number two benefit could be that you have a way to identify quickly and clearly who should go when the WPC excessive rainfall outlook is highlighting a high risk of heavy rainfall and you think that the flood risk is big. Maybe you can even potentially start calling evacuations in inland locations before the raindrops start falling because the risk is just too high. And benefit number three potentially could be that if those evacuation zones are predefined, advertised, you have a place to point our media partners to go stand well in advance, and as the event is unfolding to say, this town behind me across the river, this is an extremely vulnerable location, this is an evacuation zone, be thinking about what you might do if you're told to evacuate from this location. Just something to chew on, to take what we've done for storm surge and take it inland.
And what I really like when we put this panel together, you can tell that each one of these individuals are very, very passionate about what they do. There's no question about that, but there's that central theme. Let's give everybody a round of applause here for this.